Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Pain to Power podcast. This is your host, Justin Banks, and let me just let you know now, this is going to be maybe a tough episode to get through for a few reasons. And I want to pause here because when I say tough, I don't mean emotionally heavy just for the sake of being heavy. I mean tough because this episode challenges beliefs that many of us built our lives on, beliefs that once kept us alive. Beliefs that now might be keeping us exhausted. So let's describe this episode with an analogy. You are going to get into your car and drive cross country. You decide you will not stop this car until you reach your destination. As you're driving, you see all the warning lights coming on in your car, but you ignore them. You tell yourself you'll rest when you get there. Eventually, your car stalls and stops, and you don't make it to where you were supposed to go. I want you to really picture that. Not just the destination, but the road, the hours, the silence, the tension of ignoring warning signs. That analogy hits because it's exactly how many of us treat our lives, like something to be pushed until it breaks. And what makes this dangerous is that society praises the driver who never stops. No one questions them until the engine gives out. This analogy is meant to describe hustle culture, a complex phenomenon where many individuals are giving everything they have to succeed, but are burning out in the process. And here's the part we rarely say out loud. Burnout doesn't happen because people are lazy. Burnout happens because people care deeply, often too deeply, without support. What's frustrating about this phenomenon is the debates about choice. Many of us, especially myself, have asked, what choice do I have? If I don't grind, if I don't work, I don't survive, and I certainly don't succeed. But in the process of grinding and working, warning lights start popping up for many of us, and oftentimes we ignore them. I want to name some of those warning signs because sometimes we normalize them. Chronic fatigue, a short temper, brain fog, loss of joy, disconnection from God, disconnection from self. These are not personality traits, these are signals. When I get to my destination, that's when I'll rest. Something we always say. The struggle, however, and many have already learned this lesson, that you still don't make it there because your body, mind, soul, or all the above just gives out. So the question becomes, when is the grind good for us? And when is it detrimental? This is the question we're really wrestling with today. Not whether to work hard, but how to work without losing ourselves. How do we find higher ground on this topic to overcome the challenge and live a life full of meaning without wearing ourselves out in the process? This is a complex issue for me, and maybe for you as you're listening. And this is where I appreciate you staying with me because complexity requires patience. There are no quick fixes here. There is clarity though, if we're willing to slow down enough to receive it. I think I have some help for you. We're going to break this down step by step and apply positive action steps to help us overcome this tremendous hurdle. We got this, so let's get into it. To provide a quick introduction, I want to share a story I think I've shared on a previous episode. Personal stories, they matter because they give people permission to tell the truth about their own lives. And the story you're about to hear isn't about weakness, it's about awareness. I personally try to be a pretty healthy young man, and some time back I was working at a job I really enjoyed. But after a while, burnout set in. I had a tough schedule, sometimes working at 4:30 in the morning, having a short afternoon break, and then working again till about 7:30 at night. I was never getting enough sleep, and eventually my body started breaking down. I caught a cold, but the cough took forever to go away. Months, honestly. Then I caught COVID about 3 times, constantly getting sick and staying sick for long periods. My immune system was struggling, and I wasn't as strong as it should have been. As I explored the cause, I realized that stress was breaking my body down. What stands out here isn't just the workload, it's the lack of recovery. The body can do amazing things, but it cannot thrive without rest. And stress doesn't just stay in your mind, it lives in your immune system, your muscles, your breath. This is where science and spirituality meet. Chronic stress keeps the nervous system in fight or flight. And when it happens long enough, your body starts protecting you by shutting things down. It's not failure, that's survival. Long hours and battles with personal trauma chipped away at me like an axe to a tree. Every chop caused a little damage, and over time, that damage added up. Soon I was teetering, hoping I wouldn't fall completely. But even as I teetered, I felt stuck. What options do I have? I have goals. I have things I want to accomplish. This job feels like the only option I have to get there. So I told myself, I know there's risk, but hopefully I make it before my work kills me. This right here is where most people live. Not burned out enough to stop, but not well enough to thrive. Just stuck, pushing and hoping it doesn't cost too much. I wonder if you or someone you know has a similar story. Grinding, fighting, working with everything we have while slowly breaking down physically, mentally, spiritually, or all of the above. If this resonates, it's because hustle culture doesn't isolate, it spreads. We pass it down, we model it, we praise it. This is where it gets challenging because many of us feel like we don't have a choice. And this is where compassion matters. Because telling someone to just slow down without acknowledging fear, poverty, or trauma is irresponsible. I felt like I didn't have a choice. But what if we pause and asked ourselves a simple question? If you could have more time for yourself, would you? If you didn't have to work crazy hours or grind from morning to night, would you? Even if it doesn't feel possible right now, if it were possible, would you? This question isn't hypothetical. It reveals desire. And desire tells us where healing wants to begin. I think most of us want more time to pursue passions, figure out who we are, what we want to do, and who we want to become. We were never meant to be only workers. We were meant to be creators, friends, lovers, thinkers, worshipers. The first step is acknowledging that you want more peace. Acknowledging that you want more time for yourself. Acknowledging that all your energy doesn't have to go only toward your job or your paycheck. Can you still have energy left for hobbies or passions? What about time with friends, family, or relationships? Our lives aren't just what we do from 9 to 5. There's so much more to us than that. This is where hustle culture gets exposed. When work consumes everything, it stops being healthy, even if it pays well. So let's start pushing back, turning what feels impossible into maybe possible, and then into something sustainable. It's important to define what hustle culture actually is and why many of us experience it. Let's name it because what we name, we can challenge. This is layered, so I'll break it down. First things first, hustle culture is largely an American narrative. Not every culture embraces nonstop grinding without rest. This matters because if another way of living exists, then this way is not mandatory. It's just learned. Countries like France and Denmark have very different mindsets around work-life balance. Many careers have 35-hour work weeks instead of 40 plus. There are more vacation weeks, businesses close earlier, and a person's worth isn't as tightly tied to their work. So, hustle culture isn't universal. There are other ways to live. Let's bring this back to America. This is where it gets a little tricky because the cost of living does continue to rise, while wages often do not. This forces people to take second jobs or find additional income streams just to survive. This is where pressure meets performance. Rising costs, shrinking margins, and unrealistic expectations create panic disguised as productivity. Add social media to the mix, where exhaustion is glamorized and influencers present lifestyles that often aren't real. Many aren't making money from hard work, but from selling the illusion of it. Side hustle culture reinforces the idea that hobbies must be monetized and leisure has no value. Everything becomes work. Joy without profit has become suspicious, and that's dangerous. At its foundation, hustle culture is also rooted in the idea of self-made success. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. But that's a myth. We all need help sometimes. Success requires support. Billion-dollar companies have teams. Healthy families require shared responsibility. No one is just self-made. Independence without community is isolation. Trying to do everything alone creates burnout and limits growth. And many of us listening are already doing it alone. So ask yourself, how does that actually feel? Much of our thinking about work is conditioning. But the good news is that we can relearn. Conditioning can be undone. Now here's the part that isn't talked about enough in my opinion. Hustle culture is often a survival response. If you grew up in poverty or scarcity, rest feels risky. Slowing down feels dangerous. I know this personally. I believe that working less meant getting closer to poverty. I would grind myself into the ground, running from the fear of going backwards. This is crucial. Survival rewires the nervous system. When you grow up in scarcity, rest feels unsafe, even when you're no longer in danger. When you grow up poor, choice feels limited. And after long enough, your body can't tell the difference between survival and success. Everything feels urgent. Rest feels unsafe. Peace feels suspicious. Poverty rewires how you see time, safety, and worth. Even when you escape it financially, the mindset often lingers. This isn't weakness, it's conditioning. But here's the truth. What helped you survive one season can destroy you in the next if it's never re-examined. This idea of survival shaping how we see work reminds me of a narrative I once read by a former slave. He described horrific conditions and later criticized the next generation for not wanting to work. So this is sometime after the 1900s. This wasn't laziness though by this next generation. This was also trauma that the slave was also feeling. When suffering defines work, rest looks wrong. This story matters because it shows how trauma distorts perception across generations. Pain teaches lessons that outlive the danger itself. And that same pattern shows up today. But survival was never meant to be permanent. Healing begins when we stop equating pain with progress. That might be the most important line in this episode. So now that we've talked about where hustle culture comes from, poverty, survival, trauma, conditioning, I want to shift the conversation. Awareness without action can leave us stuck. My goal isn't just to name the problem, but to help us move towards something better, something healthier, something that lasts. Awareness without action keeps us stuck. So let's move forward. This is where I want to bring in a story that I think we've all heard before. The tortoise and the hare. Most of us were taught that the lesson is slow and steady wins the race. That's not the full story. The hare wasn't wrong for being fast. Speed isn't the enemy. Ambition isn't the enemy. Hard work isn't the enemy. The problem was that the hare had no pacing, no awareness of limits, and no respect for rest. The tortoise, on the other hand, wasn't just slow, he was intentional. He knew his capacity. He didn't compare lanes. He ran his race with rhythm, and that rhythm carried him to the finish line. Pacing isn't weakness, it's wisdom. So the solution isn't that we all need to become tortoises overnight. Some of us are hares. We move fast, we're driven. But the question is, are we running with wisdom or are we running scared? Hustle culture turns us into hares who don't know how to slow down without guilt. Healing starts when we build pacing into our lives, not stopping altogether, just learning when to push and when to preserve ourselves. The goal is rhythm, not extremes. And once we understand rhythm, biblical wisdom becomes freeing and not oppressive. God was never impressed by exhaustion. Scripture shows us a God who invites people into rest. The Sabbath was created to sustain us, not limit us. Even Jesus withdrew to pray and to rest. If Jesus needed rest to continue his purpose, rest is not weakness, it's wisdom. God's provision was often daily, not excessive. Manna in the wilderness was enough for today, just enough to trust. God never demanded exhaustion. Hustle culture says, store more, do more, be more. God says, trust me today. So solutions aren't about quitting your job or abandoning your goals. They're about realigning who you trust with your future. The tortoise didn't win because he was slow. He won because he lasted. And biblically speaking, endurance, not exhaustion, is what we're called to. So, before we close here, I want to leave you with a few simple but powerful action steps. First things first, name the warning lights. Exhaustion isn't a badge of honor, it's information. Separate survival from purpose. What helped you survive may not help you thrive. Next, redefine rest. Rest is maintenance, not quitting. Practice daily trust. You don't have to secure your entire future today. Let your worth come from who you are, not how much you produce. Build rhythm, not just momentum. There's a time to push and a time to recover. Give yourself permission to believe that slowing down doesn't mean falling behind. Sometimes it means alignment. Hustle culture tells us we are only as good as our output, but faith tells us we are already seen, known, and held. Until then, remember this. You don't need to prove your worth through exhaustion. You were never meant to. If you've been running, afraid to stop, I hope this episode gives you permission to slow down. Before I go, I want to invite you deeper into this work. If this episode resonated, subscribe to the Pain to Power podcast. You can also join me on Patreon, where I've created a devotional specifically tied to this episode, along with reflection prompts, scripture, and show notes. And if you're ready for a deeper reset, I'm also offering a 30-day digital devotional reset designed to help you realign spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. Pray up, rest up, heal up. If you want the link to that devotional reset, you can see it on my social media as well as through my Patreon. I'll see you next time. And as always, be powerful.